Welcome back into the Daily Dose. I'm your host, Jeff Hansen. As always, the show is brought to you by Give'emHellBrigham.com and by CougarSportsInsider.com, part of the 24/7 Sports Network. If you have not yet done so, please take a minute, subscribe to the channel, like this video. It helps us grow our platform, and we really appreciate each and every one of you for your support so far. Today, we're going to dig into an article by Kevin Reynolds of the Salt Lake Tribune, essentially shedding some light on some of the shortcomings of NIL efforts at BYU, particularly with one of the biggest NIL partners that BYU has had in Built Bar. There's a couple of other things that were mentioned, a player marketing agency that didn't pan out, an NFT venture that didn't pan out. Those things, I mean, it sucks. It sucks for players when things don't pan out, but that's business, right? I mean, sometimes businesses and business initiatives and strategic directions just don't work. So those, yeah, sucks. Lesson learned. Sometimes things don't pan out. Built Bar feels a little bit different because Built Bar, it seems, according to the players, that there were some promises that they feel they have delivered their part on, and Built Bar has not delivered their part. Now, in fairness, Built says that they have delivered. The players say that they have not. It's really tough to know. That's kind of the reality of where we are. So let's dig into maybe three separate categories of what this story means, right? There's the perception of this story, there's the context of this story, and then there's kind of the reality of what this really means. The perception is that BYU has partnered with a Built Bar who is just not delivering on promises. The perception is particularly to our friends up north at the University of Utah and to anybody else who's going to be recruiting against BYU in the future is that, hey, look, BYU said that you're going to get X, Y, and Z and NIL. And according to this newspaper article, you're not going to get that. That's the perception. The perception is really bad. If we take off our blue goggles, the perception of this could have long-lasting effects if BYU is not able to address those concerns. Now, to be fair, BYU is not the one responsible for these payments or responsible for the deal itself. NIL is run outside of the university. Built Bar is running its own NIL deal with each of these players, and they are individual contracts with each of these players. That's the way that the NIL world works. BYU's collective, the Royal Blue, totally outside of BYU. So the PR hit falls on BYU's shoulders, but it is important, I think, to remember that it's not necessarily BYU who's orchestrating payments or doing anything like that. And that is the same for any school across the country. It's not the universities themselves doing these things. It's collectives and boosters and fans who own businesses and things like that. But the perception is that this is something BYU is going to have to deal with. There's no question. The perception is pretty bad, and BYU needs to find a way to address it. Now, there's the context of the story. If we put things in appropriate context, Built Bar did deliver on a whole heck of a lot. They did pay the tuition for walk-ons. That was the initial promise, is that the walk-ons were going to have their tuition covered by Built Bar for participating in player events, social media activity, brand endorsements, things like that. That happened. Every player on the roster also got a $1,000 check from Built Bar, even if they were on scholarship for the same type of activity. That did happen. That's the bulk of the Built Bar relationship. And Built Bar did that and delivered well. There's been no question or debate about that. During the second phase of this relationship, Built Bar designed a cougar tail flavored product that BYU players were supposed to get a portion of the sales on. That's where the disagreement is coming from, is that players are saying they didn't receive the money that they feel they deserve for the sales of that product. That's the context where that we're talking about. That's where Built Bar allegedly has failed in all of this. If we look at this from a business hat, if we take off our BYU goggles and put on our business goggles, the product wasn't very good. And I don't know how much it sold, but I can't imagine it sold a ton. I never really heard a whole lot of demand for this maple bar flavored protein bar. I didn't hear about it. I heard a lot of buzz. I see a lot of other flavors of Built Bars flying off the shelves, but I just didn't see a whole lot of maple bar flavored, cougar tail flavored Built Bars flying off the shelf. So it's very possible that the product didn't sell, that there weren't any royalties to distribute to the players because it didn't sell. And if that's the case, then shame on Built Bar for not communicating more clearly. Shame on Built Bar for not understanding or making sure that players understand exactly what the minimum requirements are in order to get paid. If that's the way that this worked out, then Built Bar clearly failed on the communication side of things, where they delivered an expectation of X to players and they did not deliver X. It's very possible that contractually Built Bar has done everything that they were supposed to do, and that the players just fundamentally misunderstood what they were supposed to do on day one, or what the deliverables had to be in order for those royalties to qualify for those royalties. That's some of the context that wasn't super clear in the story by Kevin Reynolds today. And it's some of the context that, frankly, we don't know. But I think if we put this story into context, Built Bar delivered on a lot of things, a lot of really good things. There's a lot of walk-ons whose lives were changed as a direct result to Built Bar. This last component of that relationship, yeah, it seems like it failed. So that's the context. So what's the reality? What's the impact? We're talking a couple $100 per player. I mean, at most, right? You have a product that is selling, figure you get the standard commission rate for being some kind of an influencer of, 10, maybe 20, 15, 20%. It's just not that much. There's 120 some odd scholarship players on the roster, give and take, who's left the roster already, who's been added. I mean, potentially we could be talking about a pool of 150 players that were supposed to get 15% of a product that just didn't sell. So I think that when we put this into the actual impact, the reality of the situation is we're not talking about a ton of dollars here that did not get paid to players, but we are talking about promises that didn't happen. And whether that's reality or not, that is the perception of players. That will be the perception of opponents on the recruiting trail that are trying to convince players to sign with their school and not BYU. And that is, unfortunately, the nut now that Kalani Sitake and his staff are going to have to crack to try and restore trust in what BYU's collectives and NIL partners do for players. That's the reality that BYU faces. Whether the story is fair or unfair, I think it's pretty fair. A lot of it is stuff that I've been hearing behind the scenes for several weeks and months. So I think it's pretty fair. Maybe there's a few details missing, or maybe a few details where it's partial truths, but I do think the story is fair. And now I think it's time for Kalani Sitake and his crew to figure out how to address it. And that's not going to be easy. All in all, NIL is changing the fabric of college athletics across the country. BYU is not immune or unique in this situation. They are not immune to the criticism of NIL, and they are not unique to having an NIL partner that is not delivering what they are supposed to do. We're seeing that happen everywhere. It is something that players and parents and everybody involved with these NIL deals needs to be keenly aware of before they go in and sign a contract and have some kind of expectations. This is different. These aren't academics or football coaches that have a player's best interests in mind. These are businessmen. They want a return on their investment. And as much as we'd like to believe that these are boosters and football fans, and they're businessmen who want a return as well. They're able to do these big NIL deals because they're successful in what they do. And sometimes that means looking at the fine print. So for players, be a little bit more careful. For parents, be a little bit more careful. And for if you're wanting to do an NIL partnership with a player at BYU or anywhere else, man, maybe communicate just a little bit more. Thank you so much for your support here at the Daily Dose. Once again, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and until next time, give them hell.